My daughter looked me in the eye at her wedding and told 350 guests I was dead. I'm Jim Hayes, and I just paid $500,000 to watch her do it. Picture this. You're sitting alone at table 18 by the kitchen door. Your daughter's up front in a $32,000 dress, hugging some stranger she's calling daddy. And every flower, every crystal glass, every bite of caviar, paid for by the dead father in the borrowed tuxedo. But here's what Victoria didn't know. Every contract had my signature. Every payment came from my account. And I was holding the final check for $340,000 that would keep her perfect reception running. 26 years of raising her. 6 months planning this wedding. One moment that changed everything. What happened next shocked even me. Have you ever been invisible in a room full of people celebrating something you made possible? Stay with me. Because tonight, my daughter learned that some bills come due in ways you never see coming. The Ashford Estate, Greenwich, Connecticut. Saturday, June 15th, 2024. 4:30 p.m. I pulled my 2019 F-150 into the valet line behind a parade of Bentleys and Mercedes. The valet kid looked at my truck like I'd brought a dead fish to dinner. But he took my keys. Professional courtesy, I guess. My rental tux from Men's Warehouse felt like a costume. $89 for the day. Meanwhile, every other man here wore suits worth more than most people's rent. I could tell by how the fabric moved. You don't build a business for 30 years without learning the difference between quality and pretense. But they had no idea who was really paying for their champagne. Inside, crystal chandeliers worth $25,000 each cast light over 350 of Connecticut's finest. The guest list read like a who's who of old money. Names on hospital wings, university buildings, generational wealth. And there was Victoria, my daughter, floating through the crowd in her Vera Wang gown. She saw me enter. Our eyes met across the room. She looked away. A wedding planner with a clipboard approached. You must be. She checked her list. Table 18. Table 18. By the kitchen door, where the catering staff rushed past with trays, where the sound system buzzed, where families seat the relatives they have to invite but don't want to explain. That's me, I said. Victoria was at table 1, center of the room. Spotlight position. With her new family, the Whitmores. Preston Whitmore III was her husband-to-be. His father owned half the commercial real estate in Fairfield County. They had money that was old when my grandfather was still farming in Ohio. I took my seat and watched my daughter work the room. She moved differently now. Practiced. Like she'd been born to this. When guests asked about her family, she'd point toward table 1 and smile. My father's right over there, gesturing toward a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and a custom tuxedo. Richard Morrison. I'd never seen him before in my life. Meanwhile, my table filled with +1s and distant cousins. Nice people, but not the kind who get mentioned in the society pages. We made small talk about the weather, the beautiful venue. Nobody asked what I did for work. Probably for the best. 26 years of raising that girl. Scraped knees and bedtime stories. Dance recitals. I'd missed exactly 3 of her birthdays. All because of emergency calls. Burst pipes don't wait for convenient times. But I always made it up to her. Always. I paid for her private school when her grades suffered. $14,000 a year for Fairview Academy. I paid for Yale. $68,000 a year for 4 years. I paid for her Manhattan apartment when she couldn't find work. $3,000 a month for 2 years. And now I was paying for this wedding. The venue rental, $180,000. Catering, $85,000. Flowers, $28,000. String quartet from the New York Philharmonic, $15,000. Photographer, $12,000. 7-tier cake, $8,500. Every detail, every dollar. Me. But Victoria had made one crucial mistake in her eagerness to fit in with Greenwich society. She'd forgotten to read the fine print on her dream wedding. Let me tell you what 30 years of building Hayes Plumbing and Property Solutions really meant. Started in 1994 with a used van and a toolbox. Worked 16-hour days, 7 days a week for the first 5 years. Lived on peanut butter sandwiches and determination. But I didn't just fix pipes. I paid attention. I listened when customers talked about their problems. I learned that the lawyer with the leaking faucet was selling his building. I bought it, fixed it up myself, rented it out, bought another, then another. 23 locations now. Last year's revenue, $8.9 million. Net worth, same figure. Victoria knew none of this. In her mind, I was still the guy who came home with dirty hands. The guy who embarrassed her at parent-teacher conferences because I wore work clothes. The guy who wasn't sophisticated enough for her Yale friends. She had no idea that her simple plumber dad owned more property than half the people in this room. The cocktail hour stretched on. The distance between my table and hers felt like miles. I watched Victoria pose for photos with the Whitmores, playing the role of the grateful daughter they'd saved from obscurity. Every smile was a knife twist. My phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. Daddy, please don't mention the plumbing business tonight. This is important to me. 30 years of sacrifice reduced to an embarrassment to be managed. I looked around the room, at the crystal and the gold, at the flowers that cost more than most people's annual salary, at the guests who'd never worked with their hands or worried about making payroll, at my daughter who'd learned to be ashamed of the very qualities that made all this possible. The decision crystallized in that moment, because some lessons can only be taught the hard way. 7:15 p.m. The cocktail hour hit full swing. 3 guests approached my table within the first hour. All had worked with Hayes Plumbing over the years. Margaret Henderson, whose flooded basement I'd personally fixed last winter. Dr. James Walsh, whose medical building we'd renovated in 2019. Sarah Chun, whose restaurant plumbing emergency I'd handled on Christmas Eve. Jim Hayes. Margaret's face lit up. I didn't expect to see you here. Father of the bride, I said simply. Her expression shifted. Confusion. Then understanding. Then something approaching sympathy. Oh my. Victoria never mentioned. She keeps her private life private, I said. But Margaret's voice had carried. Nearby conversations paused. Eyes turned our way. The whispers started immediately. That's the plumber. Victoria's father. I thought he was... Oh, didn't she say her father passed away? Within minutes, the story spread through the crowd like spilled wine through white linen. I watched faces change as the news traveled. Surprise. Awkwardness. A few looked genuinely sorry for me. Most just looked uncomfortable. Preston Whitmore Sr. noticed the commotion. 72 years old, silver-haired, wearing a bespoke suit that probably cost $4,000. He approached my table with the confident stride of a man who'd never been denied anything. You must be Jim, he said, extending a manicured hand. Preston Whitmore. Victoria has told us so much about you. Polite lie. Victoria had told them nothing. Have we met before? He continued. You look familiar. I fixed your kitchen pipes last March, I said. Emergency call. Sunday morning. You were hosting a charity brunch. His smile flickered. Just for a second, then returned more forced. Ah, yes. Well, you do excellent work. Victoria is fortunate to have such a practical father. Practical. Not successful. Not accomplished. Practical. Like a tool you keep in the garage. He patted my shoulder and moved away. But the damage was done. The entire room now knew that the bride's father was the help. I watched Victoria's reaction from across the room. She'd seen the conversation. Seen the whispers. Her face flushed red, then went pale. She said something sharp to Preston III, who immediately looked in my direction. Not friendly curiosity. Assessment. Like he was calculating whether I posed a threat to his perfect evening. The mood had shifted. What started as elegant anticipation now carried an undercurrent of tension. Guests kept glancing between my corner table and Victoria's center stage position. The math didn't add up, and everyone knew it. Catherine Brooks, the venue manager, appeared at my elbow. Mr. Hayes, is everything all right? Professional concern. She'd been dealing with me for months during planning. She knew which signature appeared on the contracts. Everything's perfect, Catherine. If you need anything at all, please let me know immediately. She emphasized immediately, in a way that suggested she understood the delicate dynamics at play. Preston III made his way over. 28 years old, Harvard MBA, trust fund baby who'd never earned a callus in his life. His handshake was weak. Sir, he said, I want to thank you for raising such an incredible woman. She is incredible, I agreed. Victoria mentioned that you've had some challenges over the years. Challenges. Like working for a living was a character flaw. We all have challenges, I said. Of course. But I want you to know that she'll never have to worry about money again. The Whitmore family takes care of our own. Our own. Like Victoria had been adopted out of poverty instead of choosing to abandon her family. That's generous of you, I said. Family is everything to us. Blood or otherwise. Blood or otherwise. The insult was subtle but unmistakable. Victoria might carry their name now, but she'd never really be one of them. She'd always be the girl they rescued from working-class obscurity. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Victoria. Final payment confirmation required by 9 p.m., Catherine Brooks, venue manager. I glanced at my watch. 7:45. The ceremony would start in 15 minutes. But timelines can change quickly when you're the one holding the checkbook. 8:45 p.m. dinner service was in full swing. The ceremony had been flawless. Victoria radiant. Preston 3 playing his part with practiced perfection. Even I had to admit they looked good together. But the real test was about to begin. Preston Whitmore Sr. stood to give his toast. The room quieted. 350 guests turned their attention to the head table. Crystal glasses caught the light from those $25,000 chandeliers. The moment felt suspended. Perfect. Like a photograph from a society magazine. Friends, family, and honored guests, Preston Sr. began, his voice carrying the authority of old money and older privilege. Tonight, we celebrate not just the union of two young people, but the joining of two families. Polite applause. Knowing smiles. Everyone understood their role in this performance. Victoria, he continued, turning toward my daughter, you have brought such joy to our family. Your grace, your intelligence, your character. These are the qualities that make us proud to call you our daughter. Our daughter. The phrase hit like a physical blow. But I especially want to thank the man who raised you to be the remarkable woman you are today. Preston Sr. raised his glass and looked directly at Richard Morrison, the distinguished stranger sitting at the head table. To Victoria's father, a man who embodies everything we admire about integrity and dignity. The room erupted in applause. 350 people rose to their feet, glasses raised toward a man who had never changed my daughter's diaper, never stayed up all night when she had a fever, never sacrificed a single thing for her happiness. Victoria beamed. She raised her own glass toward Morrison, mouthing, I love you, Daddy, for all to see. 26 years of fatherhood erased with a single toast. But Preston Sr. wasn't finished. Victoria often tells us how fortunate she is to have been raised by such a principled man. How his guidance shaped her into someone who understands the importance of family, loyalty, and doing what's right. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Richard Morrison, Preston Sr. continued, gesturing grandly. Thank you for giving us the gift of your daughter. Tonight, we officially welcome her into the Whitmore family, knowing that the values you instilled in her will guide her for the rest of her life. The applause was thunderous. I sat at table 18, invisible in my borrowed tuxedo, watching my daughter accept praise for values I had taught her while crediting a man she'd probably met 6 months ago. But then something interesting happened. Margaret Henderson stood frozen with her glass halfway to her lips. Dr. Walsh looked confused, glancing between Morrison and my corner table. Sarah Chun had stopped applauding entirely and was staring directly at me with an expression of growing outrage. They remembered our conversation. They knew who the real father was. Catherine Brooks stood near the kitchen entrance, her professional smile strained. She held her phone in one hand, probably checking on the final payment that still hadn't been processed. Preston Sr. concluded his toast with a flourish. To Victoria and Preston, may their marriage be as blessed as the family that raised her. The room exploded in celebration. Victoria hugged Morrison tightly, tears streaming down her face. But I noticed something else. David Chun from the Fairfield County Social Register stood near the exit with a photographer, both watching the scene with the intense focus of journalists who sensed a bigger story developing. Richard Paulson, my attorney, had positioned himself near the stage, briefcase in hand. When our eyes met across the room, he nodded once. Ready? My phone buzzed. A text from Catherine Brooks. Sir, we need to speak immediately. Payment issues. I stood up from table 18. The room was still celebrating. Glasses raised. People laughing. Congratulating each other on witnessing such a touching family moment. But a few guests noticed my movement. Margaret Henderson watched me with growing understanding. Dr. Walsh had gone pale. I walked slowly toward the stage where Preston Sr. still stood, basking in applause. Each step felt deliberate. Final. The point of no return. Victoria saw me coming. Our eyes met across the crowded room. And in that instant, I saw her recognize something in my expression she'd never seen before. Not disappointment. Not hurt. Resolution. Preston 3 stepped protectively closer to his new wife. Catherine Brooks was already moving, her team spreading out around the room's perimeter. The catering staff had quietly stopped serving, because sometimes the truth has to be spoken loudly enough that everyone can hear it, even the people who don't want to listen. I reached the edge of the stage area. Preston Sr. finally noticed my approach, his celebration smile faltering slightly. I reached for the microphone. "Excuse me," I said. The room didn't quiet immediately. Conversations continued. Guests still caught up in the emotional high of Preston Sr.'s toast. But those closest to the stage began to notice something unusual. A man in an ill-fitting tuxedo approaching the microphone that had just been used to honor someone else entirely. "Sir, I'm not sure this is. My name is Jim Hayes," I said, my voice carrying across the room through the sound system. "And I'm Victoria's father." The effect was immediate. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Glasses paused halfway to lips. 350 people turned to stare at the man who'd just disrupted the perfect evening. Victoria went white. Preston 3 stepped forward, probably planning to have me escorted out. But I held up my hand. "For the past 30 minutes, you've been celebrating the wonderful father who raised my daughter." I gestured toward Richard Morrison, who looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. "That man has never met Victoria before tonight." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone said, "Oh my God," from the back of the room. "Preston," I continued, looking directly at Whitmore Sr., "I appreciate your kind words about integrity and values, but you directed them at the wrong person." Richard Paulson appeared at my side, briefcase open. He handed me a folder of documents. "This is the contract for tonight's venue," I said, holding up the papers. "Signed by James Hayes." "That's me." "This is the catering agreement for $85,000. Also signed by James Hayes." "The florist contract for $28,000. The musician contract for $15,000. Every single vendor agreement for this evening." I could see faces in the crowd shifting from confusion to understanding. "The total cost of this wedding is $500,000. Every penny paid by Hayes Property Solutions. That's my company." Victoria found her voice. "Daddy, please don't." "Don't what?" I asked, my tone still calm but carrying more edge now. "Don't tell the truth? Don't embarrass you? Don't exist?" Preston Sr. stepped forward. "Now see here, you can't just—" "I can't what? Pay for my daughter's wedding?" "Because that's exactly what I did." I held up my phone, showing the banking app. "This is the business account for Hayes Property Solutions. Current balance, $12.3 million. Tonight's wedding expenses transferred in full." The room was dead silent now. "Hayes Property Solutions," I continued, "is a company I built over 30 years. We started with residential plumbing and grew into commercial property management. 23 locations, $8.9 million in annual revenue. Not bad for a simple plumber." Catherine Brooks approached the stage, flanked by her assistant managers. "Mr. Hayes," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "we need to discuss the final payment authorization." "Perfect timing, Catherine. You need the final $340,000 before you can complete tonight's service." Preston Sr. looked confused. "What final payment?" "Everything was arranged." "Everything was arranged by me," I said. "Through my attorney, my accountant, and my business manager. The Whitmore family has no financial involvement in tonight's celebration." I turned back to the crowd, many of whom were now pulling out their phones to record what was clearly becoming the most dramatic moment in Greenwich social history. For 6 months, Victoria asked me not to mention my work at wedding events. She was embarrassed that her father was just a plumber. She wanted to fit in with her new family's social circle. I understood that. I wanted her to be happy. Victoria's tears were flowing freely now, but not tears of joy. But tonight she went one step further. She told you all that her father was dead. She introduced a complete stranger as the man who raised her. She erased 26 years of our relationship to maintain her social status. The crowd was restless now. Whispered conversations, shocked expressions, phones recording everything. "Preston," I said, addressing Whitmore Sr. directly, "you spoke beautifully about family loyalty and doing what's right. You praised the values that shaped Victoria into the woman she is today, but you gave credit to the wrong man." I held up a printed email thread. "These are communications between Victoria and wedding planner Melissa Chin. 23 emails over 4 months. Victoria was copied on every message. She knew exactly who was funding her dream wedding. David Chun from the Social Register was recording everything, his photographer capturing the stunned expressions around the room. So now we come to the final payment," I said, addressing Catherine Brooks but speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. $340,000 to complete tonight's service. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded check. The final payment Catherine needed. The check that would keep the reception running smoothly. The room held its breath. Catherine, as the client whose signature appears on every contract, I have a question. Does this venue provide service to people who are ashamed of their families? Catherine looked trapped. Sir, because I'm not interested in funding a celebration of my own humiliation. I looked at the check in my hands. $340,000. Made out to Ashford Estate Catering. Signed and ready. Then I tore it in half. The sound of ripping paper carried across the silent room like a gunshot. The contracts are void, I announced. No final payment means no continued service. I believe that's standard hospitality industry practice. Victoria screamed. Not a cry of surprise. A full-throated scream of panic and rage. You can't do this, she shouted. This is my wedding. Yes, I said calmly. It was. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then chaos erupted. Victoria launched herself toward the stage, her $32,000 gown trailing behind her like a silk accusation. Daddy, you can't. Please, there has to be another way. But there wasn't another way. That's what she'd never understood about business. When you make certain choices, you eliminate certain options. When you burn bridges, you can't walk back across them. Preston 3 grabbed my arm. You're insane. You can't destroy my wife's wedding over some petty grudge. It's not a grudge, I said, shaking off his grip. It's a lesson in consequences. Catherine Brooks was already on her radio, speaking rapid-fire instructions to her team. Attention all stations. Service suspension in effect immediately. Secure all payments. Contact vendor supervisors. The catering staff began clearing tables with professional efficiency. Servers collected wine glasses from startled guests. The string quartet stopped mid-piece, instruments lowering in confusion. Preston Sr.'s face had gone purple. This is outrageous. I'll have you arrested. I'll sue you for everything you're worth. On what grounds? Richard Paulson stepped forward, briefcase still open. My client fulfilled his contractual obligations. He paid $160,000 up front. The final payment was contingent on satisfactory service completion. The service was satisfactory. Was it? I asked. Because part of the service I paid for was treating my family with respect. That didn't happen. Dr. Walsh approached the stage, his face grim. Jim, I owe you an apology. I should have said something earlier. No apology needed, James. You're not responsible for my daughter's choices. But other guests were reacting differently. I could hear fragments of heated conversations. Despicable behavior. How could she do that to her own father? The Whitmores should have known. $500,000. David Chun from the Social Register was interviewing guests, his photographer capturing every moment of the collapse. This wouldn't just be local gossip. It would be documented. Published. Permanent. Victoria collapsed into a chair, her perfect wedding dress pooling around her like spilled champagne. 26 years, she sobbed. You're throwing away 26 years over one night. I'm not throwing anything away, I said. You already did that when you told 350 people I was dead. The venue was emptying rapidly now. Guests gathered their belongings and headed for the exits. Some stopping to offer quiet words of support. Others clearly eager to escape the family drama. Preston Whitmore Sr. made one final attempt at control. Hayes, let's be reasonable. Name your price. Whatever you want. Money, property, business connections. We can work this out. You think this is about money? Everything's about money. That's where you're wrong. I folded the torn check pieces and put them in my pocket. This is about something you can't buy. Respect. Catherine Brooks approached me one last time. Mr. Hayes, for the record, your account shows the venue rental and initial catering payments were processed successfully. The incomplete final payment voids the extended service agreement, but the facility usage through 10 p.m. remains valid. Professional to the end. Thank you, Catherine. You and your staff have been excellent. Within 30 minutes, the wedding reception had transformed from elegant celebration to empty ballroom. Victoria sat alone at table 1. Her husband and new in-laws huddled in urgent conversation near the exit. Preston 3 kept glancing at his wife with something that looked like disappointment. Maybe even disgust. This wasn't the sophisticated family he'd thought he was marrying into. Victoria, I said, approaching her table. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Are you happy now? You've ruined everything. I didn't ruin anything, I said quietly. I just stopped paying for it. She wiped her nose with a cloth napkin that probably cost more than most people's dinner. 30 years building your precious business, and you destroy it all in one night. My business will be fine. It's built on real relationships with real people who value honest work. But your marriage? I glanced toward the Whitmores, who were still in heated discussion. That might be a different story. Preston III was gesturing angrily at his father, his voice carrying across the now empty ballroom. You said you'd handled the financial arrangements. You said everything was covered. We assumed, Preston Sr. began. You assumed wrong, Preston III snapped. Do you have any idea how this looks? My wife's father just publicly humiliated our entire family. The social register reporter got everything. Photos, quotes, financial details. By tomorrow morning, everyone in Greenwich will know we hosted a wedding we couldn't afford to pay for. That was the real wound. Not that Victoria had lied about her family. Rich people lie about inconvenient relatives all the time. The problem was that the lie had been exposed publicly. Dramatically. With evidence. In their world, image was everything. And their image was now permanently stained. Richard Paulson packed his briefcase. Jim, legally speaking, you're completely protected. All contracts were properly executed. The payment structure was clearly defined. No court would find fault with your actions. Thanks, Richard. But personally speaking, that was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the most devastating. Maybe both. Victoria stood slowly, her dress rustling in the empty ballroom. For a moment, she looked like the little girl who used to wait for me to come home from work, ready to tell me about her day. I loved you, she said. Despite everything, I loved you. Past tense. You just destroyed my marriage before it even started. No, Victoria. You did that when you chose shame over family. I just made the consequences visible. The Whitmores finished their conference and approached us. Preston III's face was cold. Calculating. The romantic groom had been replaced by a businessman assessing losses. Victoria, he said, we need to discuss our options. What options? Damage control, media management, financial restructuring. He glanced at me dismissively. This situation is manageable, but it will require significant adjustments to our original plans. Even now, he was speaking in corporate euphemisms. Victoria looked between her husband and her father. For the first time all evening, she seemed to see both men clearly. Preston III represented everything she'd thought she wanted. Status, security, acceptance into a world where appearance mattered more than substance. I represented everything she'd been trying to escape. Working-class origins, earned rather than inherited wealth. Values that couldn't be bought or borrowed. I need to think, she said. Think quickly, Preston III replied. The longer this story circulates, the harder it becomes to contain. He wasn't asking if she was okay. He wasn't apologizing for his family's role in the deception. He was managing a public relations crisis. As we prepared to leave, Victoria called out one last time. Daddy, will you ever forgive me? I stopped at the ballroom entrance and looked back at my daughter, standing alone in her wedding dress amid the empty tables and cold chandeliers. Victoria, forgiveness isn't something you ask for once and receive forever. It's something you earn every day through your choices. What does that mean? It means the next move is yours. The story broke in the Fairfield County Social Register Sunday morning. David Chen's article ran with the headline, Wedding of the Season Ends in Financial Drama as Bride's Father Cancels Payment. The piece included photos from the reception, quotes from unnamed guests, and a detailed breakdown of the evening's costs. By noon, it had been shared across every social media platform in Connecticut. By evening, it had gone national. Victoria called me at 7 a.m., her voice hoarse from crying. It's everywhere, Daddy. Everyone's talking about it. What are people saying? Some are calling you a hero. Others are saying you're vindictive and cruel. She paused. The Whitmores aren't talking to me. What about Preston? He's evaluating our situation. His words. Evaluating. Like she was a business investment that had suddenly become risky. Victoria, what did you expect? You built your marriage on lies. Lies have consequences. I know that now. By Monday morning, the financial implications became clear. The Ashford estate was pursuing the Whitmore family for the unpaid balance. Vendors who had extended credit based on the family's reputation were demanding immediate payment. The wedding industry gossip network had spread the story to every planner, caterer, and venue manager in the tri-state area. Preston Whitmore Sr. called me directly Tuesday afternoon. Hayes, we need to settle this like gentlemen. I thought we already did. This publicity is damaging both our families. My business relationships are suffering. My son's marriage is under strain. That's unfortunate. I'm prepared to offer compensation for the financial inconvenience you experienced. He still didn't understand. After everything that had happened, he thought this was about money. Preston, you can't buy your way out of this. Your family participated in erasing me from my daughter's life. Money won't fix that. Then what do you want? I want Victoria to decide who she really is. And I want you to stay out of that decision. The social consequences rippled through Greenwich society, like aftershocks from an earthquake. The Whitmores found themselves disinvited from several upcoming events. Their charity board positions were quietly restructured. The family patriarch's reputation for shrewd business dealings was tainted by his failure to understand the basic terms of his son's wedding. But the most significant consequence was within Victoria's marriage itself. Preston III, it turned out, had married Victoria partly because his family viewed her as a project. A beautiful girl from modest circumstances who could be molded into a proper society wife. The discovery that her circumstances weren't modest at all, and that she'd been willing to lie about her family to gain acceptance, undermined everything he thought he knew about her. Customers who had heard the story reached out to express support. The working-class community that had always known my worth was rallying around the principle I'd defended. But the most interesting response came from unexpected sources. 3 business owners contacted Hayes Property Solutions about potential partnerships. A commercial real estate developer wanted to discuss joint ventures. A regional bank requested a meeting about expanding our property management services. The publicity that was supposed to embarrass me had actually enhanced my professional reputation. In the business world, standing up for your principles, even at significant personal cost, was seen as a strength, not a weakness. Victoria and Preston III attended marriage counseling for 2 weeks before he filed for annulment. His grounds: fraudulent misrepresentation of family background and financial status. Legal documents that would become part of the public record, ensuring that Victoria's deception followed her forever. She moved back to her Manhattan apartment, the one I'd been paying for throughout her marriage. For the first time in months, she was truly alone with the consequences of her choices. Friday evening, she called again. The annulment papers came through today. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you really? Victoria, I never wanted your marriage to fail. I wanted it to be built on truth. Well, now I have nothing. No husband, no family, no reputation. You have the same thing you've always had. The choice to be who you really are instead of who you think people want you to be. And if I make that choice, if I stop being ashamed of where I came from, then maybe we can start rebuilding what we lost. It's too late for that. It's only too late when one of us stops breathing. Until then, there's always tomorrow. The line went quiet for a long moment. I'll think about it, she finally said. That's all I've ever asked for. 6 weeks later, Victoria knocked on my office door. Not my home. My office. Hayes Property Solutions, Building A, Suite 101. The headquarters of the business empire she'd been too ashamed to acknowledge. She looked different. Simpler. Her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail instead of an elaborate updo. She wore jeans and a sweater instead of designer clothes. Most importantly, her expression had changed. The artificial sophistication was gone, replaced by something I hadn't seen in years. Genuine uncertainty. Hi, Daddy. Hello, Victoria. Can we talk? I gestured to the chair across from my desk. The same desk where I'd planned her wedding payments 6 months earlier. The same chair where she'd sat as a teenager, complaining about homework while I finished paperwork. How are you doing? I asked. Honestly? Terrible. The annulment made the papers. I lost my job at the gallery. Too much negative publicity. Most of my friends from the Whitmore circle won't return my calls. I'm sorry to hear that, but also relieved. She managed a weak smile. Do you know how exhausting it is to pretend to be someone else every day? To monitor every word, every gesture, every opinion to make sure it fits the image you're supposed to project. I waited. She needed to say this in her own words, at her own pace. I've been thinking about what you said, about earning forgiveness through daily choices. She looked around my office, taking in the awards on the walls, the photos of completed projects, the evidence of 3 decades of honest work. I want to make different choices now. What kind of choices? I want to work. Real work. Not managing social events or picking out flowers for charity galas. I want to learn the business that built everything I took for granted. I studied her face, looking for signs of performance or manipulation. But what I saw was exhaustion mixed with determination. The look of someone who'd hit bottom and decided to climb back up instead of staying there. The business isn't glamorous, Victoria. It's early mornings and difficult customers and problems that don't have elegant solutions. I know. I've been reading about property management, about commercial leasing, about building maintenance. She leaned forward. I'm not asking for a handout. I'm asking for a chance to prove I can contribute something real. What about your trust fund lifestyle? Your Manhattan apartment? I gave up the apartment. I'm staying at an extended stay hotel until I can afford something modest. She managed a weak smile. Turns out when your father cuts off your funding and your husband annuls your marriage, you learn about budgets pretty quickly. For the first time in months, I felt something I'd thought was permanently lost. Pride in my daughter. There's a junior position open in our residential services division. Customer service. Some basic project coordination. It pays $38,000 a year. That's more than I've ever earned in my life. It's also more than most people your age earn without experience. But you'd be starting at the bottom, reporting to managers who are younger than you, dealing with customers who might recognize you from the newspaper coverage. I understand. Do you? Because this isn't about redemption or making up for past mistakes. This is about whether you genuinely want to build something worthwhile or whether you're just looking for another form of security. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. 6 months ago, I would have said I wanted security. But security based on pretense isn't really security at all. It's just delayed disappointment. She met my eyes directly. I want to build something real, even if it's small, even if it takes years. The job starts Monday. 8 a.m. dress code is business casual, not country club casual. I'll be there. As she stood to leave, Victoria paused at the door. Daddy. Yes. Thank you. Not just for the job. For teaching me that self-respect isn't something you can inherit or marry into. It's something you have to earn. Now you're starting to understand what I've been trying to tell you your whole life. She smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her since she was 16, and walked out to begin the hardest work she'd ever done, becoming someone she could be proud of. Victoria showed up Monday morning at 7:45, 15 minutes early, wearing sensible shoes and carrying a notebook. She sat through orientation with 3 other new hires, all younger than her, all treating her like just another trainee. Nobody mentioned the wedding. Nobody brought up the scandal. Her supervisor was 24 years old. A kid named Marcus who'd worked his way up from apprentice plumber to department coordinator in 3 years. He didn't care about her Yale degree or her former social connections. He cared about whether she could handle customer complaints professionally and schedule service calls efficiently. For the first month, she struggled. She'd never had to be anywhere at 8 a.m. sharp. Never had to answer phones for 8 hours straight. Never had to smile at angry customers who blamed her for problems she didn't create. I watched from a distance, careful not to interfere. She needed to do this on her own, to prove to herself, not to me, that she could handle real work. Marcus came to my office after her first week. Your daughter's having a rough time, he said. I know, but she's trying. She stays late to finish paperwork. She asks questions. She doesn't complain. He paused. Most rich kids who try to slum it quit after 3 days. She's still here. She's not slumming it, Marcus. She's learning who she really is. By the second month, something shifted. Victoria started arriving at 7:30 instead of 7:45. She began bringing coffee for the morning crew. She volunteered for the difficult calls nobody else wanted. Margaret Henderson called requesting service for her rental property. When she heard Victoria's voice on the phone, there was a long pause. Victoria, is that you? Yes, Mrs. Henderson. How can I help you today? Another pause. Then, I need a plumber for a tenant issue. Can you send someone this afternoon? Absolutely. I'll have someone there by 2 p.m. Professional. Competent. No trace of the girl who'd been too ashamed to acknowledge her father. After the call, Margaret called my direct line. Jim, I just spoke with your daughter. I know. She's handling residential service calls now. She sounded different. She is different. Good for her. And good for you for giving her another chance. But it wasn't just me giving her a chance. Victoria was giving herself one. 3 months in, she asked Marcus if she could shadow the field technicians. Learn the actual work, not just the scheduling. Most coordinators don't care about the field side, Marcus said, impressed. I want to understand what our customers are paying for, what our technicians actually do. So she spent her Saturdays riding along with service crews, watching them diagnose problems, explain solutions to homeowners, handle emergencies with calm professionalism. She came home with dirty shoes and grease on her jeans. She looked happier than I'd seen her in years. 6 months in, she solved a problem that had been plaguing our commercial division for weeks. A property management client kept complaining about inconsistent service quality across their 12 buildings. Our account manager was ready to drop them. Victoria reviewed 6 months of service records, cross-referenced them with technician assignments, and discovered the pattern. Certain technicians weren't properly trained on commercial HVAC systems. They were improvising, and it showed. She presented her findings to Marcus, who brought it to me. Your daughter just saved our second largest commercial account, he said. And she did it by actually reading service logs that nobody else bothered to check. I called Victoria into my office that afternoon. Marcus tells me you've been doing some detective work. She looked nervous. I hope that's okay. I know I'm supposed to stay in my lane, but... Victoria, you just demonstrated something most people never learn. You look beyond your job description to solve a real problem. I just thought if we could identify the training gap. You thought correctly. And because you did, we're keeping a $400,000 annual contract. She blinked. I didn't realize it was worth that much. Most people don't think about the numbers behind the work. But you need to if you want to build something real. A year after that terrible wedding night, Victoria moved into her own apartment. Not in Manhattan. In Stamford. A modest one-bedroom that she could afford on her salary. She furnished it from IKEA and Goodwill. No designer pieces. No borrowed sophistication. She invited me over for dinner. Cooked spaghetti herself. It was slightly overcooked, but it was honest. I've been thinking, she said as we ate. About that night. About what you did. Victoria, we don't have to. No, let me say this. She set down her fork. I've spent a year being angry at you. Embarrassed. Resentful. But I understand now what you were teaching me. What's that? That comfort isn't the same as happiness. That fitting in isn't the same as belonging. That the people who really love you are the ones who'll tell you the truth even when it costs them everything. She wiped her eyes with a paper napkin. Not cloth. Paper. You could have stayed quiet that night. Let me have my perfect wedding. Kept funding my perfect life. But you loved me enough to let me fail. To make me face consequences. To force me to figure out who I actually am. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. I know. She reached across the table and took my hand. Thank you for caring more about who I could become than who I was pretending to be. We sat there in her modest apartment, eating overcooked pasta, and it was the best meal we'd shared in years. Because it was real. 2 years after the wedding, Victoria was promoted to Commercial Services Coordinator. She managed a team of 5 people. Oversaw contracts worth millions. Solved problems daily. She still wasn't making 6 figures. Still drove a used Honda. Still lived in her one-bedroom apartment. But she'd earned every dollar she made. Every promotion she received. Every bit of respect her colleagues gave her. Preston Whitmore 3 remarried. Some other society princess from the right family with the right connections. The wedding made the social register. Victoria saw the announcement and texted me. Dodged a bullet. I replied, yes, you did. She wrote back, not because he remarried. Because I almost spent my life with someone who only valued me for what I could pretend to be. Exactly. The Whitmores never contacted her again. Their world had closed ranks, protected itself, moved on. Old money always does. But Victoria didn't miss it. Not really. She discovered something they would never understand. That building something yourself, even something small, is worth more than inheriting something massive you didn't earn. I retired last year. 62 years old, ready to step back. Victoria was named Regional Operations Manager. Not because she was my daughter. Because she'd proven herself over 4 years of solid work. Because her teams had the highest customer satisfaction ratings. Because she understood both the technical side and the human side of the business. Marcus, her former supervisor, now reported to her. He told me once, your daughter's the best manager I've ever had. She actually listens. She solves problems instead of just escalating them. And she never forgets what it's like to be the person answering the phones. At my retirement party, Victoria gave a speech. Most of you know my father as the man who built this company from a single van and a toolbox. But I know him as the man who taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. She looked at me directly. That your character isn't determined by how you act when everything's going well. It's determined by how you act when you have every reason to compromise your values and you refuse to do it anyway. 300 people applauded. Employees, clients, competitors, friends. Real people who'd earned their places in that room. Not society guests performing their roles. Dad, Victoria continued, that night at my wedding, you did something that looked cruel to everyone watching. You canceled payment. You walked away. You let my perfect evening collapse. The room was silent. Everyone knew the story. It had become company legend. But what you really did was give me the greatest gift any parent can give their child. You loved me enough to let me face the consequences of my choices. You cared more about my character than my comfort. And because of that, I'm standing here today as someone I'm actually proud to be. She raised her glass. To my father, who taught me that real class isn't about your zip code or your bank account. It's about keeping your word and honoring the people who helped you become who you are. The applause was thunderous. I looked around that room at faces I'd known for decades. Plumbers and electricians and property managers. People who worked with their hands and built things that lasted. This was my real legacy. Not the money. Not the properties. The principles I'd defended. The values I'd refused to compromise. The daughter who'd finally learned what really mattered. Victoria hugged me after the speech. I'm sorry it took me so long to understand, she whispered. You got there eventually. That's what matters. Would you do it again? If you could go back to that night, knowing everything that would happen. I didn't hesitate. Every single time. Because some lessons can only be learned the hard way. And some gifts can only be given through sacrifice. Victoria runs Hayes Property Solutions now. Took over when I retired. She's expanded into 3 new markets. Revenue's up 18%. Customer retention is at an all-time high. But more importantly, she runs it with integrity. She pays fair wages. She trains her people properly. She treats customers with respect, whether they're billionaires or working-class families scraping together rent. She's never forgotten where she came from, or what it cost to figure out who she really was. Last week, she called me. Dad, I need advice. What's going on? I got invited to a charity event. Greenwich Society fundraiser. Very exclusive. My stomach tightened. And I'm thinking about going. Not to fit in with them, but because we could get some good commercial contracts from the networking. How do you feel about it? Nervous, but not ashamed. I know who I am now. I know what I've built. If they want to judge me for being a plumber's daughter, that's their problem. I smiled. Then you should go. You think so? Victoria, you're not the same person who tried to erase me from her wedding. You're someone who earned her place in that room. Walk in there with your head up. She laughed. Want to come with me? Be my +1. Really? Really? I'd be proud to introduce you. Not as the plumber. As my father. The man who built everything I'm honored to manage. So we went together. Me and another rented tux. Her in a simple black dress she'd bought at Nordstrom Rack. And when people asked what we did, she said it clearly. We run Hayes Property Solutions. Commercial and residential property management. My father started the company 30 years ago, and I'm fortunate enough to lead it now. No shame. No pretense. Just truth. Some people turned away. Old money doesn't like being reminded that working-class people can be successful. But others were interested. Really interested. Because in the end, business people respect results more than pedigree. We landed 2 new contracts that night, worth $600,000 combined. On the drive home, Victoria was quiet. What are you thinking? I asked. That I spent so many years chasing something that was never real. Acceptance from people who would never truly accept me. Status in a world that values appearance over substance. And now I have something better. Respect from people who matter. Pride in work that makes a difference. And a relationship with my father that's based on truth instead of shame. She glanced at me. I'm sorry it took a $500,000 lesson to teach me that. Worth every penny, I said. And I meant it, because the daughter I almost lost found her way back. Not to who she was, to who she was always meant to be. So let me ask you something. Have you ever been invisible in a room full of people celebrating something you made possible? Have you ever had to choose between fitting in and staying true to your family? Have you ever loved someone enough to let them fail so they could learn to succeed? Leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me your story. Because this isn't just about a wedding that went wrong. It's about the moment when you realize that the people who really love you are the ones who refuse to let you settle for less than who you're capable of becoming. Even when it costs them everything. Even when it looks cruel. Even when it breaks both your hearts. That's real love. Not the fairy tale kind you see in movies. The hard, honest, unglamorous kind that builds character instead of just celebrating it. Victoria learned that lesson the hard way. But she learned it. And that's worth more than any perfect wedding could ever be. Remember, real class isn't about your zip code or your bank account. It's about keeping your word and honoring the people who helped you become who you are. Don't ever forget that.